Congressman, great to have you back on the show.
Well, thanks for having me back on, and I want to thank NRA News for really covering Operation Fast and Furious so that your listeners know about it.
Well, people need to know about what's going on, and you're doing a great job making sure that they do. But you have subpoenaed the Attorney General for records and documents. He says he's going to comply. Any idea how soon that's going to happen?
Well, we would expect that by the end of this week we should begin getting documents. Obviously, we're more likely to get documents than we are to get him back in front of committee to answer our questions. Technically, he also has an invitation from the Judiciary Committee to come back and explain how he was so inarticulate in answering the question of what he knew and when he knew it, because I think we all understand that it's been more than a few weeks as of when he said that he knew about Fast and Furious.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about complying, I mean, as we all know, he claims that he has sent thousands of pages, to the Hill and to your committee. We look at those documents, most of them are redacted, they're blacked out. So if, in fact, he sends you more documents that look the very same way, is that really complying?
No, it isn't. And this is one of the problems is, in many cases, we'll have whistleblowers who will give us an unredacted document. We know that it's responsive. We ask for that document or a group of documents in which that's included. And lo and behold, they put black over things that should be left readable. And it's frustrating. But ultimately, they're the ones that are reducing the value of the Constitution by not being forthcoming with information. And at the end of it all, I think the American people are going to judge this Justice Department very harshly for not only what they did wrong in Fast and Furious, but for a pattern of deceiving and delay that has gone on far too long.
When they say that about the documents, how it's sensitive material, is that becoming an excuse, an easy way out for them?
Oh, it's worse than that. It's becoming a quasi-security clearance. The lowest level of security clearance for documents is technically confidential and secret and top secret. This law enforcement sensitive was made up. It doesn't exist in the law. And we've made it very clear that claiming something's law enforcement sensitive doesn't keep us from using it appropriately if we think we should. But more importantly, even when they put that on there, they then redact it and don't tell us what it is that's law enforcement sensitive. And I have people with the highest level of clearance on our staff who should be able to see these documents in an unredacted way and judge for themselves whether it's responsive.
Also, in your subpoena, you named 16 top officials with the DOJ, with Attorney General Eric Holder, among them Lanny Breuer. Can you give us any specific information as to what you found out about what Lanny Breuer specifically knew about Operation Fast and Furious?
Well, Lanny Breuer, or people on his behalf using his signature, requested wiretaps, and these wiretaps, and you probably haven't seen one. I was shocked the first time I saw one. They have excruciating detail for the judge of what they know and how they and why they need to have these wiretaps. It's a very high standard to get a wiretap. So this material showed clearly they knew, they had informants, they knew that these guns were going to drug cartels, and in several cases knew that they had already in vast numbers gone to drug cartels, and yet we've been told under oath that they never let guns walk. Well, by definition, they knew they were letting guns walk. And so that's one of the questions that goes to the Lanny Breuer is his office is coordinating this. He obviously thought that this was a good idea and perhaps poorly executed rather than it was a bad idea from day one and people are dead on both sides of the border because of it.
So any plans to subpoena him?
We expect that he will be one of the witnesses that we will take a thorough deposition of. Right now, we're doing what is appropriate, which is we ask for documents first, and then we ask for individuals once we have documents to ask them about. And that's just good investigation technique that you don't want to have people come in 3 or 4 times as you learn more. You want to get the paperwork right and have them in. Our view is that, at least for the time being, there's no Fast and Furious letting guns walk, but we need to make sure that we understand this fully so it can never happen again.
So, as you said, you asked the Attorney General to come back before your committee. If, in fact, he ever does, what specifically do you want to ask him again?
Well, obviously he wasn't forthcoming when he said he had only heard about Fast and Furious a few weeks earlier. So we will expect him to come forward when we have documents to support some of the details and tell us exactly when he was first briefed, exactly when he first heard the name, what he knew in March of 2009 when he went to Mexico City and began describing a more robust effort to interdict guns, and what his follow-up briefings were. We obviously want to ask him, I think, the question the American people most want to ask, which is, why is it you don't read your briefing? Why is it your excuse for not knowing about Fast and Furious is you can't expect me to read all my briefings? Well, I don't enjoy briefings because even though they're shorter than the voluminous documents that sit behind them, the reason you read a briefing is because that's the minimum information you must know to do your job. And it's very clear that he has to answer for why he didn't even absorb the minimum information necessary to do his job.
And know about the death of Border Patrol Agent Brian Terry. But as you're saying, even if Holder didn't read those memos, now that he's seen them, now that he knows about it, why won't he cooperate?
And why won't he make people accountable? You know, the president has said people are going to be held accountable. He says they're going to be held accountable. And yet nobody in the Justice Department, from Lanny Brewer on down, seems to be held accountable right now. The only thing they did was pick one U.S. attorney to have resign, and it's a long way above a U.S. attorney's head to authorize and control this kind of a operation.
And you've got to know, the Brian Terry family has got to be looking at this, saying, you know, there's a possible third gun. You've sent a letter to the FBI asking them about it. They insist these reports of a third gun are false. Convinced of that? Are you convinced?
Well, we can't be convinced for two reasons. First of all, because Brian's mom was told differently at his funeral. But more importantly, if there are two weapons and they say they're not conclusive, then what weapon killed Brian Terry? You can't have it both ways. They're saying because it's not conclusive, those two weapons are basically not, you know, they're saying he may not have been killed by a Fast and Furious weapon. Well, if he was killed by a bullet, where's the bullet?
Absolutely.
They can't assume that those two weapons aren't guilty, but there isn't a third weapon. And it's that kind of triple talk where they want to have it both ways so that the impossible somehow becomes possible, that this bullet fell from the sky, is the absurdity of what they'd have us believe. And the Terry family doesn't know whether there were two weapons or three weapons. I don't know whether there were 2, 3, or 4 weapons. What I do know is the Justice Department has an obligation to that family to give them the kind of investigation and to go after those responsible. Because if they don't have the right person who killed Brian Terry, they need to get the right person that killed Brian Terry. And they don't, you know, they just want to pretend like, oh well, that's just the way it goes. No, Brian Terry was murdered. He was murdered by weapons that are either sitting there in their lockup or that they need to go discover and retrieve. Another
cover-up.
Another failure to do their job. You know, the word cover-up gets overused a lot. My concern is that failure to do your job is every bit as dangerous as covering up after you haven't done your job. And my obligation to the American people, to your listeners, is to get to the truth and make sure that this doesn't happen again. And right now, I don't think any of us are comfortable that they've even admitted their mistake, much less agreed to make sure it can't happen again.
You know, Congressman, we were talking with Senator Hatch last week, and he said the Attorney General is going to go before the Senate Judiciary Committee next month. He called what he's watching a disgrace. Are you any more confident that they'll get the answers from Holder that you didn't get?
Well, Senator Grassley and Senator Orrin Hatch are both good friends of mine, and I expect that they will ask the tough questions, and they will ask them from start to finish. My only disappointment is that Senator Leahy isn't doing more on this himself. He could have subpoenaed these documents. He could have been doing more. I know he's in the president's party, but I'd like him to, stand at the plate and take a swing too, because what's wrong in this case shouldn't have party lines.
Absolutely. This is not about politics at all. When do you think you'll be having your next hearing?
Well, we expect that the next one will be Eric Holder coming before Judiciary. He's been invited. We're hoping that he sets a date. He's told Chairman Lamar Smith that a couple of the earlier dates were not possible. We would expect that's coming up. But additionally, we're going to wait for these documents to come back. We're going to evaluate them, and then we're going to take the next step as the evidence leads.
And what's that step?
Well, the next step is probably to go further into the Justice Department to figure out how a system of DEA, FBI, ATF, all of which should have been able to say, "Stop! This is a mistake." They all failed us.
Yeah, so we're not talking about contempt charges yet.
No, we're not talking contempt charges because it's bigger than one person. One of the things that I think your listeners need to understand is to have confidence in law enforcement, you have to assume that there are multiple safeguards. In this case, there were so many people who knew enough that they should have said stop, and none of them in a position of power seem to have done that. And that's part of what we need to fix. We need to make sure that the default is the American people are protected. And right now, I don't think there's a lot of confidence. As you know, the Justice Department issued this new reporting requirement through ATF requiring additional reporting and additional databasing of weapons sales as though that was the problem in the four southern states rather than fast and furious pushing weapons into the hands of the cartel.
Absolutely. We were just talking about that with an attorney tomorrow because they'll be in court, some of these gun dealers fighting that. And, and I think the attorney made a good point. What difference will it make? They were doing what they were supposed to do to begin with. They told the ATF, and the ATF said, hey, let them walk.
Well, and I think this is one of the most important things for your listeners to realize is that these federally licensed gun dealers, what they do as a public service is they do make very difficult calls between the honest person buying a weapon for whatever their legitimate use is and the person who's a straw buyer or a criminal trying to circumvent prohibitions. And when they do their job cooperating with the ATF, they shouldn't be told, oh, don't worry about it, go ahead and sell to this bad guy because we'll take care of it ever again. There should be a zero tolerance for knowingly letting weapons go into bad people's hands because otherwise we who have a legitimate constitutional right to keep and bear arms are going to be denied that constitutional right.